think we're on. We're
Great.
here. Foggy London town.
Fantastic.
John, how are you, mate?
I'm really good.
Good.
Really good. Good to see you.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It was you popped out of the cab and I walked up on you and there we are.
Yeah,
Had a good
fantastic.
chat. I think we've recorded an episode prior to recording the episode with our catch up. So it's great to be here with you, mate. And I think I wanted to start with introducing you as John Allert, and we've worked together, and part of the seed of the Dingo Mafia was actually our time together working at a sports tech company a few years ago. We were sitting around a room. There was about 12 of us in the entire company, 4 of which were Aussies. So we had the Dingo Mafia there, and I think that's where I coined the phrase Dingo Mafia. And now here we are recording the podcast together. So
Fantastic. Well, I'm touched that you've invited me.
yeah, I'm stoked to get into more of your story and hear more about it. Why don't we start with an introduction to yourself and what you're working on now, and then I want to hear about what it was like for you growing up in Australia.
Sure. So, my current role is I'm the CEO of Ineos Grenadiers, which is a pro cycling team that competes on the world tour. So people will know of the Tour de France, of course, but that's a year-round calendar of very high-end races, and those guys and girls, compete throughout the season. Some people will remember Team Sky, so Team Sky became Ineos, Team Ineos, and that's the team that I'm responsible for.
Very cool. I've got many more questions on that, but let's go back. Let's go back to Australia. What was it like growing up for you?
Oh, it was idyllic. It was not everyone in Australia, but certainly a lot of people in Australia, relative to other parts of the world, have a very blessed lifestyle, and I was lucky to have that. Born in 1969 in Mount Gambier, grew up in Adelaide, went to school, went to university in Adelaide, and had a very comfortable, stable, love-filled, supportive family life, loads of sport and culture. But it's impossible to grow up in Australia without sport playing a huge role. Never in a million years thought that I would end up with a career in sport. Even into adulthood, into university and beyond. So it's feels like a long time ago that I was there, and but I have very fond memories of my childhood and growing up in Australia.
Yeah, it is a beautiful place, and it is hard every time you go back. It's kind of that twang of like, could I come back?
Yeah.
You've made a career and a life outside of Australia. When was the first moment that you thought maybe you would go abroad and have a career or build a life, or was it just by chance?
A bit of both, probably. Yeah. So my pre-sport career was in marketing and branding, and I was part of that kind of new wave of branding in the 90s, when that sort of became a thing and started being taken seriously by business. And I got involved in a business called Interbrand, which was a big kind of pioneering force behind that movement, and ran the Interbrand business in Australia, based in Melbourne, and they then kind of tapped me on the shoulder to come over to London and be part of a turnaround of the head office here in London. I just thought it was an amazing opportunity, and I was very lucky that my wife supported me in kind of giving that a go. And one thing led to another, and brought my wife and 3 kids over here, 3 young kids then, not so young now.
Yeah.
That was 21 years ago.
Wow.
And I didn't leave. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have ambitions of it's going to be a turnaround? We'll do a short stint, maybe a couple of years, and then we'll head back to Australia. My personal story was I moved to Canada, and it was a 1-year thing. I'm going to go and help a mate start a business in Toronto, or help him build his business in Toronto, and then I'll head back. And then, as you say, one thing led to another, and it's 5 years in Canada or Toronto, 5 years in Vancouver, and now 5 years in the US. Was it like that for you, that it was a little bit of a secondment maybe that kind of grew into more?
Yeah, and I've heard others of your guests say similar things. I think it's very unusual that people say, I'm going to leave Australia, I'm going to go and pursue this, and I'm going to stay there forever. Yeah. It's few and far between the number of people who do that, I think. No, it was exactly as you suggested. It a 3-year, not contractually, but it was kind of, for my wife and I, it was like, this is a 3-year journey and a 3-year adventure. Let's go and grab it and do it and immerse ourselves in the British culture and see where it leads us. I think probably, my wife thought it would lead us back to Melbourne.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe one day it will. But
Yeah.
You can't foresee the people that you'll meet, the opportunities that you'll have, the situations that you'll find yourself in. And that's part of the adventure. That's part of the jeopardy of putting yourself out there and moving to Canada or the UK or anywhere else.
Yeah.
And that's I think part of what makes it so magical to do.
Yeah. You have worked with amazing brands, and we'll get more in that. But I want to hear about those first few years. You've got the opportunity to come to the UK. Was you being Australian a benefit in some of the interactions and some of the work that you got to do, or was it a hindrance initially?
Yeah, interesting question because I hadn't consciously thought about what impact that might have on other people. And like I said, it was a turnaround situation. It wasn't a dire situation, but there were some tough decisions needed to be made in an agency that was a very proud agency with very high caliber people working in it. And it might be a cliche, but the Australianness in me, I think, manifested as just kind of simplicity and clarity of thinking. It's like there's some shit needs to be done here, and I don't really understand why people haven't done it in the past. So let's just get on and do it. Be respectful and be sensitive to people and whatever, but everybody knew changes needed to be made, and they just kind of needed somebody that was prepared to make them. So it didn't take great intellectual genius or anything. It was just cracking on and doing it. And I think for a lot of our fellow countrymen and women, that's just how they operate.
Yeah, just get shit done.
Yeah, just do it.
Yeah. What were some of the learnings that you took, maybe from a cultural perspective, coming here and thinking you're going to do it one way and having to make those hard decisions and have those hard conversations? Was there anything that you learned along the way that maybe I should temper that, or maybe I should lean into that? Maybe I should embrace some of the British culture more so? What were some of those initial learnings and understandings and differences between the two cultures?
Yeah, I think, British culture is not just one culture, like the Australian culture is not just one culture either. So I found that, the Brits, and they weren't only Brits, there are a lot of other international people working in that environment. Sometimes I needed to slow down a little bit. Sometimes I needed to listen a little bit more. Sometimes I needed to not oversimplify things, that looked outwardly quite simple. And I don't know whether I've changed in the last 21 years and in some ways softened around some of the edges or not. I would hope that I've just become a little bit more considered than when I arrived. But I'm also 21 years older than when I arrived, so you do learn from your mistakes, hopefully. So yeah, I didn't. I just tried to be true to myself. There was no magic. I wasn't having any great inner discourse with myself about stylistically what will I be or how will I try to be or whatever. I just tried to be who I am and not bullshit people and respect people along the way. And if you still make mistakes doing that, then I don't know, shoot me, find someone else. But I was just determined to try and do things as well as I could and bring people with me.
Did you develop an Aussie network when you were here? There's plenty of Aussies in London, and I've heard some of the other guests that I've had on the show talk about when they first move overseas, the last thing they want to do is hang out with Aussies. They want to get involved in the culture and get involved in the place that they're going to or they've moved to. What was that like for you? When you're here, you're connecting with people from your company, but what was it like, being an Aussie and how did you feel about other Aussies in London at the time?
Yeah, I didn't have any kind of preconceived view. I didn't seek to build a network of other Aussies, but I also didn't seek to distance myself from them. By weird coincidence, my office was about 100 metres from Australia House on the Strand in London, and I was invited to a couple of sort of expat events and things like that, and for whatever reason, calendar or whatever, I couldn't go, and I never really became part of an Aussie network. Obviously, I've got some great Australian friends here.
Yep.
I've got some great Australian friends, in the States and across Europe as well. But I never sought to build an Australian network. When I arrived here, I knew literally one person in the UK, and I find it fascinating now that people talk about my black book and all that kind of stuff. I've never sought to build a network, but it just kind of happens along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of the Aussies that I meet along the way that have had successful careers and they've built successful careers, a lot of it is due to the network, and it is something that's relational. It's not something that you can force. You may force it for a period of time and, I'm determined to build a network so that I can progress and grow, but that quickly becomes, John or Travis are just trying to get something out of somebody.
Yeah.
So I think there's that relationship piece that Aussies, I think, do pretty well. Would you describe that as one of your strengths, is being able to build those genuine relationships, which then build the network, which then provide opportunity?
Yeah, I'm very open to talking to people and staying in touch with people, and I do naturally just connect people. And I read the Malcolm Gladwell book, The Tipping Point, many years ago, like most people did, and within that there is a kind of a connector role that describes how society works and how people meet each other and how trends start and all that kind of stuff. And reading that, it made me realize that is something that I do. I don't do it consciously. I don't contrive to sort of put people in touch or whatever. But I equally, if I see that there's an opportunity or a benefit in person X meeting person Y, I don't hesitate. And I don't think that's special or unique or anything. It's just something I do, and a lot of people do it. But maybe the Australian part of that is not being afraid to go out on a limb and say, hey, you should meet such and such, and not being retiring in that, just kind of saying, hey, why don't you guys see if there's, a spark to be had between the two of you, and I'll leave you to it.
I would say, and I might be wrong, but I do think that, and this might be a generalization, Aussies are better at that than other cultures, I think, because I do think there is it's a genuineness to it. It's like, well, you and you are doing something similar, or you and you have aligned passions or goals, you should get together. I've found that, particularly some Americans, it's like, well, I have to check with that person first. I'm not sure if they're going to, want to have that connection. So yeah, it might be a generalization, but I feel like we have maybe an innate nature to be like, well, you should be mates. Go and meet. Go
crack on.
That's right.
Yeah. Look, I'm one of whatever it is now, 28 million Aussies, so I can't pretend to speak for everybody else. But I don't have an agenda, and I think some people are worried about what's the agenda. And I don't know. I've always just experienced that if you're authentic and respectful of people, you don't try and impose people on other people, but if you,
it's got to make sense.
Yeah, if you see that there's an opportunity there, then put them together. Why not?
Yeah. I want to hear more about the progression from Interbrand. So you turn around the business, I'm assuming, or not. But then that leads to an opportunity to go and work at McLaren.
Yeah.
Obviously a global brand, a huge brand, particularly in the motorsport space, automotive space. Tell me about how that opportunity came to be.
Yeah, so if I go way back before that into kind of the mid-'80s, growing up in Adelaide had a Grand Prix.
Yep.
And, my brother and I used to go along into the cheap seats and look through the chicken wire fence at the drivers and the team bosses and all that kind of stuff. And, and we used to love it. But I was never a petrol head, never kind of, into Formula One in that way. It was just kind of the show came to town and it was fantastic. So yeah, years later, 2003, 2004, had an opportunity to pitch for a piece of work for McLaren. And I kind of thought, wow, why not? And it was nothing to do with Formula One. It was actually to help them with their brand entering or re-entering the supercar market.
Yep.
Very top secret project, and through that I had an opportunity to ultimately meet Ron Dennis, now Sir Ron Dennis, in Woking, not far from where I live. And it blew my mind that I was even meeting the guy who I'd seen through the chicken wire fence in Adelaide all those years earlier. And the first time I met him, we actually got into a massive argument.
Right.
And I won't bother going into.
Well, I want to hear about that, because as a part of the pitch meeting, I'm, pitches I've been in, you kind of like, bow to the company or the person that you're pitching to. So tell me more about you can kind of fill in the story, but that's fascinating to me to think about that as a concept.
Yeah, well, Ron's an arch negotiator,
right.
and a very clever man, and he started the meeting by saying, just stop. I was just about to do my introduction and get into my spiel.
Yeah.
And he said, just stop before you start. Is there anything you're going to tell me that I don't already know? And I was like, oh shit.
Put you on your heels right from the beginning.
And I said, well, to be honest, I don't know, because I
don't know what you know.
I don't know what you know, but I'm pretty confident I'm going to tell you some stuff that's interesting.
Yeah.
And anyway, we then got into a bit of argumentative banter, but I learnt very quickly, certainly in the years after working with Ron, that was a technique to kind of unsettle you and see whether you kind of had the conviction behind what you were saying, and which I did. And anyway, one thing led to another quite quickly, and he said, "Why don't you come and join us?" And I said, "Oh, no thanks. Because I'm an agency person. I run an agency."
Yeah.
And I don't think people said no to him very often, and I sort of didn't kind of clock that. So he persisted, and I kept saying no, and he thought I was negotiating,
right,
which was another lesson I then learnt, because the offer got better.
Yep.
And I kept saying no, and the offer got better, and this went on for 2 years, and then eventually he invited me to the Belgian Grand Prix, and we were flying back from the Belgian Grand Prix on his jet, and he said, "Right, cut the shit.
Yeah, this is your last chance.
Yeah, cut the shit. Why don't you come and join us?" At which point I then thought, why not? I was a bit afraid, to be honest, right, to just work on one brand, because at that point I was working on the Orange brand at the height of its fame across Europe. I was working on British Airways. I was working on some fantastic brands, and got a lot out of that, working with great people, had helped with a lot of other people turn that agency around, and we were doing brilliant work. And I thought, God, I'm right at the height now of what I'd always wanted to do with this agency.
Yep.
And now I'm going to leave, and I'm going to go and work in this world that I know nothing about, with 1,500 engineers and people working in Formula One and automotive and technology. And then I just thought, fuck it, I'm doing it, and off I went. And it was quite a culture shock going in there, and I was seen as the creative guy,
yep,
in amongst a lot of very clever scientists and engineers.
Yep.
And so being the creative guy, or being branded the creative guy, you needed to be really careful. Any time you opened your mouth, something good had to come out of it.
Right.
You couldn't just waffle and bullshit your way through, which you might smile knowing me.
Yeah,
so it was a challenge. So yeah, I learnt to be very pragmatic, very thorough. But I also had a kind of a secret weapon, because none of them were creative. None of them thought laterally in the way that I just presume everybody thinks.
Yep.
They think they use process, and they use logic and fact and data and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I was able to impart something new to them, but I was also able to learn a hell of a lot from them as well. So that's how I ended up in Formula One, and that's how I ended up in sport. So like I said, I never had a plan to end up in sport, and there I was.
You grew your career within McLaren, and you worked on the retail, call it supercar market, and then moved into Formula One, which then led into cycling. Tell me about what that shift into the cycling space, coming as that you were the CMO of McLaren, this super job in a super industry in a supercar, and then the cycling opportunity comes about. Tell me about how that came to be.
Yeah, so I was at McLaren all up for about 14 years, and during that time, I went from the creative guy to ending up on the board, and worked. Ron moved me into the office next to his, and so I worked very kind of hand in glove with him on strategy, on commercial stuff, on creative stuff, and on general business stuff, cultural, everything, architectural,
Yep.
We worked very closely, and I was very fortunate to have that experience. Formula One was also an amazing, sandpit to go and play in, and to play in it with people who were as good as not just Ron, but other people, Martin Whitmarsh, other people in that business, who I had a lot to learn from. But eventually I started kind of joining some dots. Formula One at the time, this is pre kind of Drive to Survive, pre Netflix, and Formula One was starting to kind of face some challenges. So environmental credentials, gender equality, all those sorts of things. It was an aging demographic, so it had a lot of challenges. And working on the commercial side of the business, I started joining dots, thinking maybe we could race, in other areas. Maybe we don't only have to race with an engine. Maybe we could look at cycling, for example. Better green credentials, mass participation, better male-female split in terms of its audience and participation. And Formula One and cycling are actually quite close bedfellows. A lot of people in Formula One are very passionate about cycling, drivers and other staff. And so I started sort of teasing this out with a couple of commercial partners, people like Richard Mille, of the watch fame, and he was massively supportive. And I pitched it to Mark Cavendish, who had become a kind of a friend, because we'd done a lot of consulting work on bike technology, and through that I'd met Cav. And sounds pretentious, but I was at the Monaco Grand Prix, pitched the idea to Cav. He threw his arms around me and said, "This is fucking amazing." Yeah. And I was like, "What?" And he
so
said,
a different experience to pitching Cav than pitching Ron.
Yeah, massively. But and his enthusiasm was infectious, and I thought, wow, this is
you're onto something.
Maybe I'm onto something here. Yeah. And cut a long story short, he then introduced me into kind of his network of people, and through them, through that network, I met Rod Ellingworth, who at the time was at Team Sky. Cut a long story short, I poached Rod, got him to join McLaren, and together we built that up, with the backing of. I pitched it to the Crown Prince of Bahrain, who was the majority shareholder of McLaren at the time, and he loved the idea, and so we launched a cycling team called Bahrain McLaren.
How was those first few years? And I want to get into the cycling business because I'm fascinated about it. But how were those first couple of years with the team and building that team and building a new organization? And what was that like?
It was tough because what we actually did was merge with a pre-existing Bahrain cycling team, and so I had to meet a whole raft of new people, most of whom were either Eastern European or Italian, and so we had to build out the proposition. We had to convince them of our credentials in terms of what we were going to contribute, in terms of IP and science and technology and commercial acumen. So it was, in a way, it was like it was a merger, really, not just a startup. And so it was tough, but really exciting. I mean, it was hugely exciting and motivating. And we worked on it for a couple of years before it launched, and then we launched at the end of 2019, and then raced into 2020.
Yep.
And we won races. We were out there, and the McLaren brand was in cycling for the first time ever, which was a source of huge pride for me and others. And then everybody remembers March 2020, COVID hit, and at that time McLaren stumbled as a business and got into some fairly stormy waters, and effectively the sky fell on my head, and they pulled the funding. So the team was able to limp on until the end of 2020, but having worked on it for that long, it was a very short-lived dream and short-lived chapter, and it was really, it was emotionally very difficult because I'd brought a lot of people along the way into the dream, and it was a very heartfelt mission that we were on.
Yep.
For all of us, and then to kind of have the rug pulled from under us through no fault of our own was tough. But it's only in hindsight that you learn those things kind of are formative and developmental. You never wish them on yourself, but bloody hell, they harden you up, and it did that.
Tell me some ways that helped in the development of you. You've had an incredible career. You've built this team. You've built this experience, and then all of a sudden, rugs pulled out from you, as you mentioned. What was it like on the other side of that? What did you learn about yourself? What have you been able to use to fuel the next chapter?
I think probably the biggest one was just humility. It's very easy. It's very easy in a world like Formula One to mistakenly think that that's the real world, and that the people you meet and work with, and I worked with some amazing people, but I met extraordinary people and childhood heroes and whatever, and it's very easy to convince yourself that that's normal and real, and somehow that you belong there. When that is all taken away, you realize that actually it's just artifice, and all you've really got left is yourself and your family and your own IP, your reputation, your intellect, whatever's in your head. There's no brand behind you. So it taught me humility, and then resourcefulness, I think, because then it was the middle of COVID, and it's like, shit, I've still got a mortgage to pay. I've got
got to figure it out.
I've got outgoings. I've got to work this out, and that's actually how we met. I got involved consulting to various different businesses. Some of them startups, some of them mature businesses. One of them was Super Sapiens that we both ended up doing some work for, and I came out of that period a very different person, I think, than the person that went in. I'd like to think that I was never a dick, going in, but certainly coming out, I was a much more accepting, sensitive, patient, understanding person.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think that chapter for a lot of people probably had a similar, maybe not exactly the same, but you, as you described, you're living the life. You're on the jets to the Monaco Grand Prix, you're in the boxes and you're talking to Cav, and you're living the life. And then all of a sudden the whole world shuts down, and it's, the business you were working on isn't doing well. As you described, all you've got left is yourself and your family and those loved ones and the people that are close to you. How has that, the new humility that you've found and the new perspective on life, how's that helped and fueled the next chapter as you moved on to Ineos and leading that organization now. Do you think that it resonates that you're actually able to kind of keep some of those lessons and keep building on that perspective that you have?
Yeah, definitely. I've not consciously thought about it, but thinking about it now, it's probably given me a heightened sense of context.
Yep.
So I'm not. I don't kid myself about my role in the kind of or the importance of my role. Yes, I've got a leadership role, but the profundity of my role, it's a job.
Yep.
There are people that who are your paymasters. You have objectives. You've got to meet those objectives. You have people who you're trying to lead and inspire and bring with you. But there is a humility there. So there's a context, I think, and a perspective. So
Yep.
nothing's forever, and sometimes you kid yourself in the moment that this is your reality.
Yep.
But it's not your reality at all. You're a bit player in some bigger thing.
Yep.
And that bigger thing could be a company, or it might be a decade that you're in, or just a situation. And so I think now I kind of have not a distance, but I have a perspective.
Yep.
To what I'm doing.
Love it. I want to talk specifically about the cycling world. A lot of the listeners probably know Lance Armstrong, they know Cadel Evans, they know the Tour de France, as you described earlier, but it's a big business, and sponsorship is an important part of it, as you described. McLaren kind of did this joint venture with Bahrain to build a team. A lot of organizations will just write a check and they put a logo on a jersey. I think I read that Ineos, former Team Sky, have now had 500 wins, one of the most successful teams in professional cycling, been around for a long time now, won multiple Tour de France's and Grand Tours and won everything. How do you see cycling sponsorship and cycling business, being an insider and leading one of the biggest teams? I've always been fascinated by the model where it is so sponsor reliant. What's your perspective on that? Tell me a little bit more about where your brain goes in the cycling business.
Yeah, that's a big question for our sport, is the sustainability of the model, and that is being debated, right now. It's for people who are unfamiliar with the model, the model is basically one where you eat what you kill, and your budget is only as big as the sort of sponsorship income or investment income that you can bring in from either your owner or from external parties. There is no kind of underlying enterprise value to cycling teams. There are only 18 World Tour licenses. But the scarcity, it's completely unlike the Formula One model. Formula One model, there are 10 licenses, and there is also a Concord agreement that binds together the governing body, the FIA, and the commercial rights holder, F1, with those 10 teams, and they share, not equally, but they share in the spoils, and there is a formula for how they do that. Cycling, you, as a team, get no upside from anyone. In fact, you pay to compete at a lot of these. Pay for your
license, yeah.
There are some you pay for your license, but you then pay to compete at some of the races that you are obliged to race at,
right,
which is just nuts. So you compete at the Tour de France, for example, and you might have the very best riders, but you don't get any kind of dividend check from that event. So that's why I say there's potential there for change, and we're very lucky that we're a team fully owned by Ineos, and Ineos have an ambition in sport that's now increasingly kind of well understood. Now kind of controlling the sporting side of Manchester United. It's hard to keep that secret. So we're very lucky, but the model is a precarious model, and as a result, there is a lot of churn with cycling teams. But there's also just churn of the sponsors. So the naming, the names of the teams, even though often it's the same team, the family tree goes right back many years.
Yep.
But the team might have changed names every year or every 2 years. So to build a franchise in the traditional sense is extraordinarily difficult. You might have a famous rider or riders, but it's very hard to build a fan base if you change the name of the team every year. You imagine a football team, a soccer team, or a NFL team changing their name every year. It would be lunacy.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of challenge that we face. But as a sport, I mean, I just love it. It's romantic. It's crazy. The physicality is crazy. A lot of people in Australia, I think, because we weren't raised with cycling being on the back pages of the sports section of the newspaper like it is in Europe, don't appreciate that, a single stage of the Tour can have 1 million spectators on the road.
It's so cool to see. Yeah.
Just 1 million people just come out for free and just spectate this amazing event, and I previously would get very excited about the fact you'd get 100,000 people come to the AFL Grand Final. But you imagine 1 million people on the roadside, and when you're involved in it, I compare it to looking through the fence in Formula One. I mean, it's off the scale, and like I said, the physicality of what these people go through in a sport that is now I think as clean as any sport in the world, if not cleaner. It's a brilliant proposition. It just needs to find a way to have a commercial viability.
Yeah,
like most other sports.
How close are you to the riders and to the team now? Obviously, there is the commercial obligation, and you hold that seat to be able to keep the team functioning as it is from a commercial perspective. How close do you get to the team? Are you able to go to races and experience what you described of that? The rolling circus of 21 days around France, or a mountain stage in Spain somewhere in the Tour of Spain. How close are you to the team and that experience now?
Yeah, I'd like to think very close. Do I go to every day of every race? No, because I've got a hell of a lot of work to do that doesn't happen on race. Most of my work doesn't happen on race, and there are people whose roles it is to optimize our performance on race. But yeah, it's important that I stay close to the races and the racing, and it's important that I stay close to the riders. I don't try to be friends with the riders. It was a lesson I learnt in Formula One, that you could see people who tried to get close to the Formula One drivers didn't last very long.
Right.
They're not your friends. It's not, there's no kudos for being able to say, Lewis Hamilton and whatever, even if you do. And it's the same with the riders. Some of them you're closer to, and some of them you're not. Some of them you message, and some of them barely know you. I'd like to think that I could pick up the phone to any of them, and they know who I am, and hopefully trust my motives. But yeah, some of them you're close to, and some not, and some in other teams you're close to as well. It's a community, and that is similar to Formula One. People see it as very adversarial, and you're all fighting against each other, and I'm sure some other sports are the same thing. But actually, it's a big community, and you're all stuck in the same airports together, and you're in the same hotels together, and people move between the teams. So that's one of the joys of sport is that being part of that community.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about Drive to Survive or the Unchained documentary on Netflix. Similar, the narrative is that there's all these rivalries and the competition, and everyone hates each other, and we hate that team and that rider and what have you. There's some of it, of course, but it is the narrative that keeps people looking. What's the drama? What's happening next?
Yeah. Drive to Survive, I think, has become a little bit of a melodrama. Right. I think it started off as quite an authentic portrayal of what goes on, but as the seasons have ticked past, people have started playing for the cameras more and more. And certainly for me, I don't watch it anymore, because when I see people who I know well
performing,
contriving a different version of themselves, it's sort of, I think then it becomes just entertainment. But Unchained, I think, is doing a great job on Netflix of portraying kind of the brutality of our sport and how hard it is, and the the rivalry that goes on. I've made some fantastic friends who are the heads of other teams, and we talk all the time, and we have weekly calls and whatever. We're all trying to do the same thing.
Yep.
We all want to beat each other.
Yep.
100%.
Yep.
And we'll never disclose everything that we're doing, of course, because we're all trying to win. But yeah, we all have pretty much the same objectives and the same challenges, and working together behind the scenes actually, in many ways, helps you overcome those.
Yeah. What are some of those things that you have identified? Maybe it's with other heads of teams or owners of teams. Even the riders probably have a perspective on how to adapt the model of cycling to be more sustainable. What are some of the things that you're working on, or that you have in your mind of opportunities that you would like to pursue to make it possible?
Yeah. So there is one that's been in the media, which is called One Cycling, which is a proposition that we're speaking to one of the investment funds from Saudi on, which is a potential new series that would be co-owned by a number of the teams, potentially all the teams, and some of the other race organisers as well, in collaboration with an external investor, in this case Surge, which is the sports investment fund for Saudi. And that's really exciting because it shows a model that would bring about sort of kind of equality of outcome and bring a number of stakeholders together. We would want to do that in collaboration with the governing body. It's not conceived to be a breakaway or anything. It's conceived to be a sustainable alternative to the current model, and it would enable, if it's successful, it would enable greater sustainability for some of the teams that are kind of right in the margins at the moment.
It is fascinating to go back to what you described of kind of the family tree of teams. If you look, go to a Wikipedia page or of one of the teams, and you kind of see the sponsors rotating and rolling through, and even riders changing teams. It didn't happen as much previously, but now it feels like, every year there's a transfer to different teams. Is that one of the things that you're thinking about as well, as how do you build longevity within the team, within, the same staff and the same riders? Because obviously those connections and that work together is probably going to propel. Is that something that you're focused on as well, is keeping the team together as much as possible?
Yeah, there's a natural churn that happens, happens in business, happens in any walk of life. There's a natural churn. So you know that a certain percentage of people are going to leave at the end of every year and go away to another team or leave the sport, do something else. But yeah, you try to build a core culture, and within that culture you have a number of people who are kind of, cultural kind of examples of what you aspire to be, and they're very important to retain, of course. And losing those people is hurts. And then we have had riders, Luke Rowe, who's just retiring at the end of this year, has just ridden at the top level for 13 years, and he's only ever ridden for one team, which is us, which is extraordinary. And that's very, very rare.
Yes.
It's extraordinary to even have a 13-year career, let alone in one team. Geraint Thomas has been with us since the beginning of the team in 2010, and that's extraordinarily unusual. And those sort of guys are very, very important in terms of manifesting what our culture stands for. Not in a mission, vision, values, in a frame on the wall, but like as living icons of the sport. And people listen to them and look to them for kind of leadership and guidance in terms of what we're about. So yeah, you try to build that. You can't contrive it, but you can help shape it and nurture it. And and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, well, you try to build a culture that people want to stay in.
Yeah.
Whether it's, whether they've got offers elsewhere for more money or for more prestige or whatever it is. But if you can build a culture and a team that people want to stay in, then it's going to be of benefit. There's plenty of Aussies in the World Tour, whether they're staff, whether they're riders, whether they're, in the UCI. How is that connection? Do you find that camaraderie when you're in the same room with Aussies, or you mentioned, other folks that are in the industry? Is that something that you get that instant camaraderie.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, obviously, all Aussies are not the same,
Yep.
but and you don't get on with all Aussies just because they're Aussies. But it is fascinating how easy it is when you talk to other Australians. And I'm thinking of riders, Richie Port,
Yep.
Cam Worth, who's also a big name in triathlon, Jack Haig, who's with one of the other teams. When you bump into these guys at a training camp or on race or something, it's Australians. Well, I have a lot of South African friends, and they speak Afrikaans to each other. And when they speak Afrikaans to each other, you just know that they're in a slightly different place, and
Yep.
there is a fluency, not just in language but in culture, and there's a shortcut that they can take on topics and culture and humour and all sorts of things.
Yep.
And although we don't have a version of Afrikaans, there is something about when you're just chatting to another Australian that you just instantly, I don't know, there's layers
Yep.
evaporate,
Yep.
and you just feel like you're having very real conversations very quickly, with even if you've never met them before.
Yep.
And so I've made some great mates, Aussie riders, partly because of that, I think, because you kind of, I don't know, you just know where the other one's coming from.
Yep. And it's probably, whilst we don't have our own language, we also kind of have our own language.
Kind of.
We were talking about it before we started recording, where I find myself not speaking in some of the slang terms that I would if I'm in America or in the UK, because people just don't understand.
Yes.
But I think you can throw out certain things to another Aussie, and there's an instant recognition. And almost a tennis effect where it's, you kind of bounce back and forward from each other.
Yeah, 100%. I have a very close friend, Sam, in Melbourne, who, you get on a call and he is one of the, he's one of the last of the dying art of what is Cockney slang, rhyming slang.
Yep.
But there is a version of it that's Australian rhyming slang. And I mean, it's just I find it a fabulous, disarming, fun way to have banter.
Yep.
And he will speak in rhyming slang that I think probably I'm the only other person that actually understands. So in a way, it is like a different language. I think that's probably a dying art, but there's just a directness to it and a warmth.
Yep.
That's really special.
Yeah. Makes me miss it.
Ditto.
My kids are funny now. They want to know the different words we use for certain things in Australia. Their favorite one is dunny for the toilet. That's their favorite one. They're 7 and 4, so they're the toilet humor, the dunny humor is.
Well, they think a dunny's a John, so don't start me on that.
Oh gosh, mate. This is awesome. There's a couple of things that I like to finish with. First is the introduction, or the thing that I propose to someone I already know. Obviously, I knew you, so this was my pitch to you, and you were much kinder than Ron Dennis. So I'm going to read that out. Let me scroll back into our messages here. So, hey, John, hope all is well, mate. Long time no chat. I'm working on a new project, a podcast called Dingo Mafia. Aussies abroad doing big things, trying to break down tall poppy syndrome and showcase the innovation and perspective we bring to a global scale. Would love to have you as an early guest if you're open to it. Hi, Trav. Good to hear from you. Sounds interesting. I'm happy to help. Let me know what you need and when. Hope you're well. That was the intro. So very kind. You were ready to jump on it. Don't ask questions. We didn't talk about tall poppy syndrome today. Let's do that, because I think it is an important topic. You described, coming to the UK to lead a business. You were the head of the Australian business. How did tall poppy syndrome show up for you in your early life or in your career once you made it overseas and abroad?
God, that's a great question. I was aware of tall poppy syndrome, because culturally growing up in Australia, you are aware of it. And I probably just assumed that was a normal thing. Mm-hmm. And obviously living for a long time in the States, you've experienced that's not. I think there is a degree of tall poppy syndrome in the UK, definitely.
Right.
I don't know. maybe a bit naive. I'm not sure whether I've ever actually experienced tall poppy syndrome, because I don't actually think I've really done anything deserving of being cut down. But yeah, I think tall poppy syndrome's a sad thing, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it doesn't actually represent the way Australians really feel about Australians that succeed on the global stage. It's a little bit like, if you have kids, you can criticize your own kids, but if anyone else criticizes your kids,
watch out.
Watch out.
Yeah.
And I think Australians feel, for some reason, a license to be able to criticize their own who've gone out and done things, become film stars or sporting icons or whatever. But I'm sure if people from other countries then criticize those people, Australians are likely to jump to their defense.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's a shame that we can't just wear more easily our pride in those people that go out and do amazing stuff, whether that's, Kylie Minogue, or whether it's Barry Humphries, or whether it's a, footballer, whoever. It doesn't matter who it is.
Yeah.
We should embrace the fact that those people have gone and done something and actually represented our country. That we
and the culture.
Yeah, and culture, and presumably, country and culture that we love and celebrate and are proud of.
Yeah.
So the manifestation of that out into the world, I don't understand why you wouldn't be proud of people who go and do that.
Well, I think the manifestation of your version of it is the humbleness and the humility you bring to what you have done, where the culture or growing up says, don't be too proud. You can be proud of what you've done, but don't be too proud, because then you're showing off, or you're a bit of a wanker, or look at this guy, big noting. So I think whilst you are humble about what you've done, it also may be a little bit like, well, don't be too proud.
Yeah, there's not a scale of there's not a scale of pride. I don't know where the right level. Am I proud of what I've done? I guess if I had to answer yes or no, I'd say yes.
Yeah.
But I don't get around consciously thinking I'm proud of what I've done, because I don't actually think I've done anything particularly miraculous. I've just kind of rolled with the punches and just grabbed opportunities when I've seen them. There's been no strategy behind it, to be honest. I wear other Australian people's success very easily, I think, and I would like to think that I'm very embracing of it and celebrate it, because why shouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, you're an inspiration to me, mate. The career you've built and the way that you've gone about it is really impressive, and I appreciate you finding time to sit down with me. Who else? What other Aussies should I get on the show?
So do I now name and shame?
Name and shame. Put them on the list. Let's make it happen.
Because then people are going to know if they haven't shown up. So there is a guy, Danny Townsend, who I look up to as somebody who's really put kind of Australia on the map in terms of sport. I mentioned the Saudis. Everybody knows the ambitions that the Saudis have in sport. Whatever people personally make of that is irrelevant to this, and that is that the guy spearheading that for the Saudis, investments in sport the world over, is an Australian guy who comes out of Sydney, built his own business, sold that business, did very well, and instead of putting his feet up, is just cracking on and forging new space in terms of the way sport's structured, investment in sport. And I think he would be, if you can pin him down, good luck. He's a phenomenally intelligent, really lovely, very humble guy.
Yep.
Who's doing some pretty cool stuff on the world stage. So if you can get
Amazing.
him,
well,
I'll help you. I'll try anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, he'd be a great guest for Dingo Mafia.
Amazing. Let's do it. Let's finish with the quickfire questions. Same every episode. Right. I have 8 that I ask, and then there's a special question that's just lined up for you. So, first one, Vegemite, yes or no?
Oh, definite yes.
Definite yes. Good. Best Australian beach?
Ooh. Wow. Emu Bay in Kangaroo Island.
Wow. Never been.
Stunning.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna have to check it out. Sydney or Melbourne?
Melbourne, definitely.
Who's an Australian that you look up to?
I mentioned Barry Humphries. You know, if I look up to my parents, I look up to my wife. But if it's people who've gone and done things on the world stage, Barry Humphries to me was just he really forged new territory for Australians on the world stage. He was amazing.
Yeah, love it. Your favourite place in the world to relax?
Inside my head.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Tell me more about that. What's that like?
Peaceful. Yeah. I love sleeping.
Right.
I don't get to do a lot of it. But yeah, I love the sanctitude of sleep.
Yeah.
And I love dreams.
Wow. How long did it take you to develop that? Is that something you've always had, or is that as you've gotten older and gotten more comfortable with yourself that you kind of feel that peace within yourself?
No, it came for free because I did it every night. No, I mean, there are all sorts of places physically. I mean, I've been very lucky. I've traveled to crazy, ridiculous, beautiful and amazing places. And they're all amazing.
Yeah.
Everywhere in the world is, and everywhere I haven't been is probably equally amazing. No, I just find peace inside my own thoughts. I'm not at all religious. I have no spirituality, but yeah, I just find peace in memories and dreams and
love it. That's that's an amazing answer. Love it. What's one Australian habit that you've kept while living abroad?
Honesty.
Yep.
Don't know if that's a habit.
No, I think it's you're the boss here, mate. You make the rules, so that one works.
That'll do.
If you could have dinner with any Australian, dead or alive, who would it be?
Wow. Dead or alive? It's not a single person, but both sets of my grandparents.
Cool. Very cool. This is deep answers. I really like it.
Don't know. They're good questions.
Thank you. This one will be easier. What's your go-to coffee order?
Flat white.
Sugar? No sugar?
Well, hang on. So it's flat white in the UK.
Yep.
But flat white in the UK is not, as Australians will know, is not really a flat white. So I would never order a flat white in Melbourne.
Right.
I'd order a strong latte in Melbourne. But a strong latte in Melbourne translates into a flat white,
here
in London. Yeah.
There you go. All right. This is the John question.
Go.
You've played a pivotal role in shaping some of the world's most recognizable brands. If you had to build a brand around your personal philosophy or life motto, what would the tagline be?
Don't be a dick.
Oh, I love it. John, amazing. This has been super fascinating, mate. I appreciate you making the time. It's great to reconnect. I look forward to getting Danny on the show and we can talk about the work that you guys are doing together. But yeah, mate, this has been amazing. So thank you again, and look forward to having you back in 100 episodes from now.
Trav, it's a great concept, and I think you do it brilliantly well, and I really can see this taking off. So congratulations on getting it up and running, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, mate. Love it.
That was an absolute pleasure.
Good on you, mate. That was great.
Terrific.
Thank you.
That was really...
Thank you. I'm sweating, but...